I woke at 2 a.m., with my chest burning as if a truth had been written into my ribs, a sentence I had avoided for years. Evelyn thought Richard wanted forgiveness, not connection, and I had been paying with silence. The room smelled faintly of old wood and regret, and I knew I was rehearsing confessions that were never mine. Richard once said, "Family means loyalty," but I understood it as surrender. I carried his stories as if they were sacred, but my body remembered the cost. Daniel once told me, "You shrink to survive," and those words still echoed. My mind whispered bargains, keep peace, stay quiet, belong. Yet tonight, the mask cracked, and I felt the weight of the contract I never signed. I was no longer the child who absorbed wounds in exchange for approval. I realized this bargain had been survival, not truth. And survival now demanded defiance. Evelyn carried Richard's commands like scripture, each word etched deeper than her own desires. She thought, if I obey, maybe I'll belong. But belonging never came, only silence and bruised memory. Richard once told her, "You'll thank me someday," and she nodded though her chest burned. The truth was simpler. She never wanted gratitude, only freedom from his weight. Daniel had once warned, "Obedience isn't the same as love." Evelyn replayed those words every night, but still built her cage. Tonight, the wood cracked. She recognized how her life had been rehearsed for someone else's absolution. That bargain was never hers, yet she carried it like inheritance. Now the mask slipped, and the cost was undeniable. Richard had always been the storyteller, and Evelyn the silent keeper. He polished his failures into lessons and demanded her loyalty as proof they mattered. "Family doesn't abandon family," Richard said, and Evelyn answered with compliance. Yet her body kept the ledger, a hidden archive of costs. Every nod, every yes, was a withdrawal from herself. Daniel once asked, "What would happen if you said no?" The question haunted her, unfinished, unbearable. Tonight, Evelyn knew the answer. She would lose nothing worth keeping. For years she believed silence was survival. Now she saw it had only chained her. She had never been free, only obedient, and obedience was not the truth she needed. Evelyn remembered the kitchen table, where Richard's silence was louder than words. He didn't need to shout, his disappointment filled the room like smoke. Once he said, "You owe me respect," and Evelyn nodded though her stomach knotted. She mistook survival for devotion, her mask a tool for peace. Yet peace was never granted, only rented with her obedience. Daniel told her once, "Respect is not a debt, it's a gift freely given." But Richard never asked, he demanded. Tonight she replayed his words and felt the bargain shatter. Respect had been currency he extracted to soothe his own guilt. Evelyn saw clearly now. She had been financing his comfort with her silence, and the price was unbearable. The first act of survival had been shrinking. Smaller voice, smaller presence, smaller needs. Evelyn had learned early that safety came from invisibility. Richard praised her compliance as strength, never seeing it was fear. "You're my rock," he said, and she nodded though she felt hollow. Daniel once whispered, "Strength isn't silence, it's truth," and she wanted to believe him. Tonight, the illusion unraveled. The mask no longer fit, and her silence was suffocating. Evelyn realized that her life had been built on appeasement, a performance rehearsed to protect Richard's image. But his absolution was never hers to give. The cost of belonging had always been herself, and now she refused to keep paying. Evelyn traced the wound back to childhood, when Richard's rules became her heartbeat. He taught her that love was earned by obedience, and she believed it. She thought, "If I'm useful, I'll be safe." That lie followed her into every room, where she measured herself by how small she could become. At the dinner table she rehearsed silence like a ritual, swallowing words until they burned. Daniel once told her, "You were a child, not a servant," but she struggled to believe him. The mask she wore was smiling, efficient, dependable. Beneath it lived a terrified girl who wanted to scream. Tonight, Evelyn admitted the mask had never saved her, only preserved Richard's image. She whispered to herself, I want truth, not survival. Richard's voice lived in her body long after he left the room. You owe me respect, he once said, and she carried it as law. Evelyn bowed to that law, sacrificing dreams for acceptance. She stayed late at work to prove reliability, laughed at jokes that stung, and nodded when silence suited others. Daniel asked, "What would it feel like to choose yourself?" And the question unraveled her. She had no answer, only fear. The want was clear, belonging. But the need was sharper, integrity. Tonight, she saw the difference. Her life had been measured by Richard's pride, not her own pulse. The anchor of obedience cracked, revealing emptiness beneath it. Evelyn realized her survival rule had expired. The lie had carried her far. If I disappear, I'll be loved. It shaped her posture, her choices, her voice. Richard rewarded her silence with approval that felt conditional. Once he said, "You make me proud by staying steady," and she carved the words into her marrow. But pride was not safety, only control. Daniel once pointed out, silence is not neutrality, it's erasure. Evelyn felt those words like fire. She realized she had erased herself so thoroughly that even her laughter felt borrowed. The mask of competence fooled others, but inside she was brittle. Tonight she saw the mask for what it was, armor rusted from overuse. And armor was not the same as freedom. Evelyn's rituals had always calmed her, counting breaths before speaking, folding napkins into perfect squares, writing lists she never finished. Each routine was a shield against Richard's disappointment. He once said, "Control yourself and you'll control the world," and she obeyed. Yet tonight, folding napkins felt absurd, like guarding a castle already fallen. Daniel's voice surfaced again. Order is not peace. She understood finally. Her order had been a disguise, a performance to avoid rejection. But rejection came anyway, quiet and cruel. The anchor of ritual faltered, leaving her bare. She realized she had built a life of careful gestures, but none of them had ever set her free. At last the mask began to slip. Evelyn remembered a moment when Richard praised her while dismissing Daniel's truth. "She knows how to stay in line," Richard said proudly, and Evelyn forced a smile. Yet the smile cracked, and Daniel's eyes caught it. He did not scold, only looked at her with recognition. That was when she felt exposed, the mask no longer perfect. Tonight she relived that fracture, the slip that revealed how tired she was of pretending. The old rule, stay silent, stay safe, was no longer reliable. The mask had failed, and so had the bargain. She whispered into the quiet room, "I don't owe him my erasure." And the words felt like air. Evelyn sat across from Richard, his words sharp though delivered politely. "Family should be grateful," he said, and her chest tightened. She had heard this sermon all her life, but tonight it felt like a lock snapping shut. Each sentence closed another door, leaving less space to breathe. She tried to smile, but her jaw ached from holding back the truth. Daniel's voice pressed at the edges. "What if you refuse this script?" The thought both thrilled and terrified her. Silence had been her currency, yet Richard's eyes demanded payment again. She realized she could not escape by shrinking. The smaller she became, the more he consumed. Survival itself was now at risk. The conversation lingered like smoke, impossible to wash away. Evelyn remembered Richard once saying, "Your silence is your gift." She had believed him, but now it felt like theft. She replayed his demand until it hollowed her out. The walls of the house seemed to echo his rules, an archive of commands she could not erase. Daniel had told her, "Silence serves someone, and it isn't you." That truth cut deep. The silence that once protected her now bound her like iron. She realized Richard had always benefited from her quiet compliance, while she carried the invisible wounds. The weight grew unbearable, each breath proof of a life not her own. She found an old letter tucked inside a book, written years ago by Richard. It praised her obedience and warned against selfishness. Her hands trembled holding it, realizing the motif had followed her silently, shaping her choices. The letter was not encouragement, but control dressed as love. Evelyn whispered, "It was never mine," and her voice startled her. The paper smelled of dust and ink, yet its weight was heavier than stone. She saw the truth. Every compliment had been a cage, every thank you a contract she never signed. The artifact of his words shifted from comfort to prison. The floor beneath her tilted, and the past rewrote itself in her hands. Richard's image of himself never faltered, but Evelyn saw the cracks. He smiled while reminding her of debts she never owed. "You'd be nothing without me," he said once, and the words haunted her like a ghost. Tonight, she realized the cruelty hidden in his charm. The myth he told, of sacrifice and care, was a mask he wore more tightly than she wore hers. Daniel's reflection of truth returned. Not all protectors protect you. Her heart pounded with the knowledge that his love had always been conditional, measured by her submission. The revelation pressed against her ribs, making her breath shallow. She could no longer pretend his story was true. The memory fractured further when Evelyn noticed Daniel's silence. He no longer rushed to comfort her. He waited instead. "You must choose," his eyes seemed to say. She realized even allies could not carry her truth. The pressure mounted. Family myth, inner critic, Richard's voice. Every path backward was sealed, every exit blocked. She stood in the center of her own storm, masks slipping, silence failing. The choice before her was brutal. Continue paying for Richard's absolution, or claim herself and risk exile. The walls of obedience closed in, but within that suffocation, something fierce stirred. The storm was not just around her, it was inside her, demanding release. Evelyn stared at Richard's old journals, pages where he praised his own sacrifices. He wrote of nights he saved her, but the words twisted in her stomach. Each act of care was framed as a debt she owed. She whispered, "You weren't protecting me, you were protecting yourself." The realization hit with the force of a verdict. His stories had never been about her survival, only his absolution. Daniel's warning echoed, "Beware when care feels like control." The mask cracked wider, and Evelyn felt her body tremble. What she once called safety was only surveillance. What she once called love was just control, dressed in patience. The twist lit every old moment in harsh new light. She remembered Richard's embrace after a childhood mistake. His arms had felt warm, but his words were sharper than knives. "Don't embarrass me again." For years she had clung to the hug and buried the threat. Tonight she saw both clearly. Affection as a leash, comfort as currency. Evelyn whispered, "It was never love, it was transaction." The hug replayed in her body, once soothing, now suffocating. Daniel had said, "Memory can be both truth and trap." She realized she had lived in the trap, telling herself the hug was enough. But the truth was unbearable. Richard had wanted obedience more than closeness. That revelation cracked the foundation of her entire past. The mask Evelyn wore was never hers. Richard had stitched it from shame and expectation. He praised her for being steady, quiet, useful, and she mistook that for identity. "You're strong because you don't complain," he once said, and she built her life on that lie. But tonight, the sentence read differently. It wasn't strength he admired, it was her silence. Daniel's voice returned, "What if the flaw is competence in the wrong hands?" Her silence had served in a hostile context, weaponized to preserve his image. Evelyn's breath came sharp, as if the room itself rejected the old contract. She was no longer willing to be the mask. She was ready to see herself. She confronted Richard, his eyes narrowing as she spoke truth. "You weren't saving me, you were saving yourself," Evelyn said, and the words echoed like thunder. His smile faltered, the myth collapsing in real time. For the first time, she saw fear in him, not of her, but of exposure. The protector had been his own mask, and she had been its cover. Daniel had told her, naming harm is power, and now she understood. Every memory burned with new clarity. She was not weak for surviving, she was strong for seeing. Richard's silence in that moment revealed more than his words ever had. The twist had become undeniable. The revelation landed heavy. She was not broken, she was awake. Every bruise she carried, every silence she rehearsed, was proof of her strength, not weakness. The flaw Richard named was competence in a hostile world. She whispered, "I authored the myth that chained me, and I can end it." Daniel's calm presence nearby was steady, not rescuing, only witnessing. The choice sharpened: continue carrying Richard's absolution or choose herself. Her body shook, but her breath steadied. The twist was complete. She no longer asked, "What happened to me?" The question now was, "Who am I if I choose truth?" That question was terrifying, but it was finally hers. Evelyn stood in the living room, her chest rising as if she had been running. Richard's eyes demanded surrender, but she no longer bent beneath them. "You will respect me," he said, but his voice carried no weight now. For years she thought obedience was survival. Tonight, she discovered silence could be defiance. Daniel's steady gaze anchored her. He said nothing, letting her voice matter. Evelyn whispered, "I don't owe you my life." The words burned her throat, but once spoken, they became truth. Her breath steadied as if air had returned. The bargain was broken, and the cost was visible in Richard's faltering pride. Richard's mouth opened as if to argue, but Evelyn lifted her hand, palm firm. The gesture itself felt like rebellion. "No more," she said, and the sound cut through the room like glass breaking. Every memory of compliance seemed to collapse at her feet. He tried to smile, but the mask cracked. "You'll regret this," Richard muttered, yet his certainty faltered. Evelyn's heart pounded, but her shoulders didn't bow. For the first time, her refusal had weight. Daniel shifted slightly, his eyes proud, but he remained silent, refusing to rescue. The choice was hers, and she had made it. Approval was lost, but integrity was found. The silence afterward was unbearable, yet Evelyn refused to fill it. Richard's pride deflated, his hands gripping the armrests tightly. He had no script for defiance. "You've changed," he whispered, almost afraid. Evelyn replied softly, "No, I've arrived." The room seemed to shift, furniture no longer an altar to his control. Her breath deepened, each inhale proof she was no longer small. Daniel leaned forward slightly, as if to say yes without words. Evelyn's decision was costly, and she felt the fracture, belonging torn, inheritance fading. Yet the emptiness was spacious. It was not exile. It was freedom. Richard's last attempt came sharp. "Family is everything," he said, clinging to his story. Evelyn inhaled slowly, chest lifting with resolve. "Family without truth is nothing," she answered. The words struck like a verdict, final and unyielding. His face hardened, but the authority had drained. She felt the cost of her choice instantly. The bond rewritten, the approval shattered. Daniel's presence steadied her, silent but unwavering. She knew she had crossed a line, one she would never return from. The decision carved itself into the air, irreversible, undeniable. Evelyn's voice had claimed space where silence once lived. The moment ended, not with spectacle, but with stillness. Richard turned his face away, no longer a towering figure, but a man undone by truth. Evelyn exhaled, the old bargain left behind with that breath. She knew she had lost his approval, his story, his inheritance. Yet what she gained was her own name, unedited and unashamed. Daniel's quiet nod confirmed it without words. The mask was gone, the silence broken. Integrity had cost her belonging, but it had given her freedom. The door behind her closed with a quiet click, sealing the old life away. And for the first time, Evelyn did not look back. The house was quiet, but Evelyn felt the silence differently now. It was no longer Richard's silence weighing her down, but her own space, earned and steady. She walked through each room as if reclaiming it, tracing the furniture that had once been arranged like altars to his rules. Every chair had held her obedience, every table had carried her silence. Now they were simply objects, stripped of power. She remembered nights of folding napkins, polishing silver, rehearsing perfection. The rituals had kept her small, but tonight she let a napkin lie undone, proof she no longer needed symmetry to survive. Daniel's words echoed gently, "Order is not peace." She smiled at their truth. The air felt lighter, not because Richard had changed, but because she had stopped carrying his burden. Evelyn whispered, "This is mine," and the words filled the space like light, turning walls into witnesses of freedom. Evelyn stepped outside, the morning cool against her face. The street was quiet, dew glistening on parked cars, the world alive with a fresh beginning. For years she had walked these same steps with her head lowered, rehearsing the right answers, carrying the weight of Richard's rules into every interaction. But today her shoulders were lifted, her breath easy. She realized belonging was never about their approval. It was about her presence in her own life. Daniel's steady voice returned in memory. What would it feel like to choose yourself? The answer arrived now, simple and undeniable. It felt like air. She let herself stand still, feeling the ground beneath her feet, no longer rushing to prove or appease. The ritual of shrinking was gone. A new ordinary began here, not with spectacle, but with space. Evelyn whispered, "I belong here," and for the first time, it was true. Inside her kitchen, Evelyn poured a glass of water and set it before herself. The same table that once held Richard's demands now felt different, no longer an altar but a surface for her life. She noticed the glass clarity, its simple presence, not waiting for judgment. In the past, every meal had been a performance, perfect posture, careful words, practiced gratitude. Tonight she sat casually, elbow on table, no script rehearsed. Daniel's laughter once echoed here, reminding her she could live unedited, and now she allowed that sound to return. She realized that reconciliation, if it came, would be conditional and boundary. She no longer needed to erase herself for peace. Some bridges could burn, some could wait. The table hummed with a quiet honesty. She was present. She whispered, "This is enough," and for the first time, enough did not mean less, it meant whole. Later, Evelyn visited Daniel. His presence was steady as ever, not rushing to celebrate her, not trying to rescue her. He simply asked, "How do you feel?" She paused before answering, realizing the old habit would have been to edit to say what was expected. But tonight she told the truth. "I feel like myself." His eyes softened, and that was enough. No applause, no spectacle, just recognition. Evelyn realized the steady hand had always been there, seeing her beneath the mask. Their friendship was not built on her shrinking, but on her honesty. That was the new ordinary, relationships that required no bargain. Daniel smiled faintly, and she returned it, knowing he would not ask her to shrink. The mask had been retired, and in its place was her voice, simple and sure. She thought, if this is what remains, it is enough to build a life. That night, Evelyn stood before her mirror, but it no longer felt like an enemy. The cracks were still there, yet they no longer accused her. She saw not the mask, but herself, tired, scarred, but whole. She remembered Richard's words, "You'll thank me someday." And for the first time, she answered in silence. Not denial, not agreement, but absence. The old contract was void. She leaned closer and whispered, "I don't need your absolution." The reflection whispered back with steadiness. Her ritual of erasure was over. Tomorrow she would walk into fewer rooms, answer fewer calls, and let some bridges remain ash. Yet she felt no fear. The thing she once feared losing, approval, was no longer her definition. The thing she once was ashamed to want, freedom, was now ordinary. The dust had settled, and what remained was her. She smiled at the mirror and left the room in peace. The next morning, Evelyn sat with coffee in hand, the steam curling against her face like a gentle reminder she was alive. The kitchen once felt like a stage where she performed gratitude, but now it was simply hers. She remembered Richard's voice filling this space, dictating how every gesture should affirm his care. The words echoed faintly. "Respect is a debt." But today she laughed softly, realizing how untrue that was. Respect had never been a debt, It was something freely given, and she no longer owed him anything. Daniel's presence from the night before lingered in her chest, not as rescue, but as witness. She thought of how her silence used to choke her, how the rituals drained her spirit. She sipped coffee slowly, choosing to savor instead of perform. The air was lighter, as though every wall had shifted. She whispered, "This life is mine," and the words settled like morning sunlight. Later, she walked through the neighborhood, each step measured not by fear, but by presence. The sidewalks carried memories of her shrinking, every errand performed with downcast eyes, every greeting edited for politeness. Today, her pace was slower, her gaze lifted. Children's laughter carried in the distance, and she let herself smile without reason. Richard's voice still tried to surface, reminders of who she was supposed to be, but they held no power now. Daniel's question returned, "What would it feel like to choose yourself?" The answer was clear with each step. She already had. Evelyn realized belonging was no longer tethered to Richard's pride or the community's approval. Belonging lived in her steady steps, in her clear voice, in her ability to walk without apology. She thought, "I am not an actor on his stage anymore. I am the author of my own script." And the script was freedom. That afternoon, Evelyn visited the park. She sat on a bench with her notebook open, not to edit herself but to write unfiltered words. For years her writing was carefully curated, each sentence meant to please Richard's expectations of dignity. Today the pages filled differently. She wrote of anger, of longing, of strength, of silence broken. She didn't pause to erase. She let truth spill in its raw form. A breeze tugged at the pages, reminding her that truth did not need perfection to matter. Richard's phrase, "You'll regret your words," whispered in memory. But it no longer landed. Daniel's steady reminder, "Your voice belongs to you," rose louder. Evelyn's pen scratched with urgency, her hand steady. She realized the shame she carried was not hers but inherited. She lifted her head and looked around. People walked freely, and she felt part of the world, not beneath it. The mask was gone. That evening, Evelyn found herself back in the living room, the same room where everything had fractured. The lamp glowed softly, no longer an interrogation light, but a warm companion. Richard's absence was noticeable, yet not heavy. The emptiness was not a wound, but a gift of space. She sat on the couch where Daniel once watched silently, remembering his refusal to rescue her. That memory no longer stung, it steadied her. For years she believed emptiness meant failure, that without approval she was nothing. Tonight, she discovered emptiness could be spacious, a room with air enough to breathe. She whispered aloud, "I am not afraid of this." Her voice did not tremble. The house that once carried his rules now held her choice. The weight of performance was gone. She stretched her legs across the couch, a simple act of comfort, proof that her life finally belonged to her. Before bed, Evelyn returned to the mirror one final time. She remembered the crack from before, how it once split her reflection into mask and self. Tonight the crack remained, but she no longer saw division. She saw a whole person, scarred, yes, but alive. Richard's voice whispered faintly, "Family is everything." She smiled sadly at the memory, realizing it was never about family but about control. She touched the glass gently, not to fix it but to honor it. The past had left marks, but marks were proof of survival. Daniel's quiet nod from earlier returned to her mind, a silent blessing. She whispered, "I will not audition for my own life." The line echoed in the room, strong and final. It was her vow, her inheritance, her freedom. The silence that followed was not empty, it was sacred. For the first time, Evelyn stood inside a decision she could bear.